What I love about being a director of photography is being at the nexus of the script and the director and the production designer, and you get all these voices together, working together. You're kind of the one that's helping bridge the vision from kind of an abstract concept, and you're helping kind of funnel that and bring that to life. Well, I always had a camera in my hands from pretty early on. My dad was an amateur photographer, and so I realized pretty early on I was very comfortable with the camera in my hands, and without knowing what I was doing, of course, as a kid, would just try to figure out, okay, it wasn't a conscious thing, but okay, if we're doing these, goofy things, shorts with my friends, or even just trying to capture a moment, with the still camera, it was like, okay, where's the best place to put the camera, with what lens, and oh, look how the light's playing. It was this kind of just experiential process over years. Everybody has a different journey. Some folks have an easier time, getting started. Some folks come in late. It's a roller coaster, and I think it always will be. You definitely have to be able to, embrace that to the best of your ability. Doesn't mean everything's always hunky-dory when things aren't working out the way you want to, or when you have to kind of slog through it, or both career-wise and within a project, frankly. But it is persistence, and it's kind of continuing to push through. And if the truth is, if you love it enough, you'll figure out a way to keep going. Even when you're like, is this the right thing? Sometimes it can be a really hard journey. It can also be satisfying in so many other ways too. But it does take the passion, the consistent passion. You kind of have to constantly push yourself, whether that's creatively or the way you work with other people, and it's a constant growth thing, and it takes a lot of work, I think. It's that kind of creative artist thing, but like never quite satisfied, It's the drive home at the end of the day, like, if I'd only done this, that shot would have been better. Definitely something that happened early on that was great for my career. And I shot a short film coming out of SC that ended up doing really well. Went to Sundance and ended up winning an Oscar, which is great. It's called West Bank Story. This was 20 years ago now. Coming out of the gate with that kind of momentum was great from a career and just, it was a film that we all worked really hard on. It's also things ebb and flow. There's huge peaks and there's also, curveballs and twists and turns along the way. American Horror Story, I shot a few seasons of, which is a great show. I love that show. Because it's an anthology every season, of course. Yes, American Story has its own, its own stylistic things and vision from the Ryan Murphy world from the beginning. It's a really kind of bold operatic show, and there's a lot going on. And I love that show because it allowed us to redefine certain things every season. So in a way, it's kind of the best of both worlds. You weren't starting from scratch every season, but you were able to bring different approaches and really push bold looks every season. So there was the advantage of working with some of the same folks and knowing kind of how everyone operated and what certain things would work and wouldn't work, but then also being able to kind of push the look. And I've done a lot of shows that I've shot the pilots or helped set the look for. So I love that in series because obviously it's a different beast than a feature, but in some ways it's similar in that you're with the director and the showrunners and the designers, you're establishing a world and the look, and it may evolve over the course of that season or the series in general as it goes, but you're there at the beginning and you're kind of setting the ground rules for everything, which is a lot of fun. I've been fortunate to be part of shows that the creators, the showrunners, and really kind of want you to take bold steps and are open to big ideas and to kind of want this series to branch out a little bit and grow. And personally, that's where it's the most exciting because, again, you're not just always doing the same thing. I like collaborating with other DPs too. I think that's really interesting. So a lot of the shows I've been on, you aren't alternating, but more and more I've been on shows that you're alternating with other DPs. So, you're hopscotching back and forth on episodes. And some shows, they win ones where I've shot the pilot or set the look and worked with other DPs, which is great because you're bringing them into the fold. And as DPs, a lot of our job is to creatively take ideas and somehow fashion them into an image, right? It's kind of the conceptual into the factory of creating an actual image, which is both creative and technical. So I think, it's exciting to work with other DPs on shows where maybe a look is already established, but there's still always room, I find, to express yourself, to bring what you do, to bring what you have to say as a DP and with that director on that episode, or to bring your own kind of voice in there. It's an interesting kind of balance. I love American Horror Story. Yeah, that was kind of the first big show I was a part of. It's a wild, wonderful, just a beautiful beast of a show in so many ways. It's ambitious, and being able to take kind of big, bold swings with the look. So much of how I view my job is trying to plug into, as best I can, kind of plug into the director's brain, really. What are they responding to? What are they inspired by? How are they seeing the material? And that can be both kind of, obviously it's broad strokes, but it's also just, what catches their attention? What's their priority? What are they excited about it? And then from there, I can kind of bring my own ideas to the table based on that. I have a little bit of a music background too, so music's really important to me. And so like, images over time is cinema, right? Music is obviously sound over time to tell a story, really, and to create emotion. So music is definitely a big one for me. I often try to find, like, what would the music for this scene be, or like, what's the tone, or, and sometimes directors will have an answer for that and sometimes they won't, which is totally fine. But trying to find like a sonic kind of anchor is an interesting way to try to both inspire, but also kind of find your bearings creatively, visually. First time I read a script, I try not to think about it too much. I try to just be as open to it, try not to let myself start going down the cinematography or visual side of it and just kind of let it hit me. So that my initial impressions of it can be intuitive and not get too nailed down. But the second time, okay, now I start to like, okay, now that I know what it is and have my own feeling about it, then it can become something I try to like translate into an idea of what to do about it. And then of course it continues to change. I don't know if I have a lighting style. Before I get into thinking about the lighting, I'm trying to figure out what this world should feel like in a given project. A lot of the stuff I do takes place in the real world. I say that because I haven't done a lot of sci-fi. I haven't done a lot of fantasy or I don't know, that kind of stuff. I would love to. Even I'm thinking like American Horror Story seems like that is obviously a little more stylized than other versions, kind of more stylized versions of the world. I still have to motivate my lighting from some kind of reality. So even if the reality is pretty hyper, it needs to be motivated from so I have to motivate the lighting from somewhere. It has to, in that universe, it has to come from a source that would make sense to me. Because I think audiences feel that, and there are exceptions to that for sure. I mean, sometimes if the story calls for it and we need to go subjective into a character's head and the background falls off and they're in a spotlight for a really dramatic example, like, that's great. That's what the story calls for. Otherwise, I think to be with a character, I'm trying to help put the audience with the character in whatever that space is. Been on the border of sci-fi here and there, but I haven't done a long-form project sci-fi. I'd love to. So, trying to put that out there. Put that out into the universe. But because some of my favorite films and projects are sci-fi for sure, in the way that in some ways, like horror does, it's externalizing. You can create a version of the world that visually can be kind of externalized in a really stylistic way. The creative choices are emotional and story and character based in a way that allows you a lot of freedom, I think, once you define those rules. So I love the challenge of that. What makes a great rental house to me is service and the relationships, really. I mean, of course, needs to say the right the gear and the support, but it's really like, I do a lot of series work in the recent past and things come up all the time. And it's like, oh, all of a sudden the schedule shifted, or there's this new element, this lens we want, or something, or the camera went down because XYZ, or we need another camera. Like any part of the process, it's I think a rental house that'll meet you where you need to be for a demanding project. I have a small arsenal of personal cameras, from old little film cameras to digital cameras to Leicas to Mamiyas to the whole thing, a little Canon A1. But like, whether it's like street photography with my family or just walking in my car, it's like, if I have a camera with me, that's my favorite piece of gear. It's a discovery process for me, looking through the lens of a camera. So it might be, I might take stills on a location scout that aren't like directly related to what the scene is, but if something catches my eye or there's an angle that I find, not trying to overthink it, but intuitively find interesting, the still camera helps me kind of capture that and articulate that. And then I can take that and look at it and I'm like, oh, this is what I come back to later. And this is what I found interesting about that location, was from this angle, and why is that? And then we can talk about that. So still camera is a really important tool for me. More than all the toys and the, I jump around between all kinds of lenses and cameras and all the gear and all the stuff, which is great. They're all tools for telling a story, but like, I don't know, my trusty Sidekick camera is still probably the thing I love the most.